Hey everyone, welcome to another Deck Tech. This is week 2 of 5 of my Temur Delver adventure. Every week there's a different Deck Tech on a different variant of Temur Delver. This week we are looking at Temur Hex Delver. Last week we were looking at Temur Traverse Delver. And today we're going to look at the Hex Drinker version of Temur Delver. There are variants of Hex Drinker running around in the Temur Delver community, and I want to give you my take on Hex Drinker in the Temur Delver shell. So we're looking at the core again, as usual. You know how these deck techs go, and if you saw the deck tech from last week and the first deck tech I ever did on Temur Delver, you'd know that Delver Secrets and Tarmogoyf are basically staples in any competitive form of this deck or this archetype. So I don't really need to tell you why we have Delver Secrets or why we're playing Tarmogoyf. Delver Secrets is your main tempo creature. It's up in the air most of the time with your 26 to 30 spells in your deck, instants and sorceries, I should say. Tarmogoyf, of course, is your main ground creature, your main ground threat. It'll either put pressure on your opponent or stall out your opponent when things are not in your favor, but things are also not in their favor in terms of attacking in, because your Tarmogoyf just has a big butt and it's gonna get big in this deck and in most Temur Delver builds. So the real change here is that we've gotten rid of Hooting Mandrills, and in their place, we've put in Hex Drinker. So why would we put in Hex Drinker? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, Hooting Mandrills, Tarmogoyf, they all fight for your graveyard. And in the Traverse build, their Traverse is also fighting for your graveyard. So your graveyard is a resource, just like your life, just like your lands, just like your mana, right? So these are all resources of different kinds that you can use while you're playing a game of Magic. And when you have too many creatures or too many spells that are reliant on one specific type of resource, other than lands, obviously, there can be some issues. So when you're delving for Hooting Mandrills, you're gonna clean out your graveyard, which might turn off Traverse. It might make your Tarmogoyf smaller. So although generally speaking the decks are built to avoid that, and almost always you're going to avoid that kind of an issue, it also makes it easier for your opponent to hate on you graveyard wise. So one thing Hex Drinker does dodge is that the graveyard hate that your opponent will probably bring in against you will turn off your Tarmogoyf, but at least it won't turn off your Hex Drinker, and that's a bonus. Another reason why you're going to be playing Hex Drinker is because it's actually an interesting creature to play in this shell. You can level it up relatively quickly on turn 3 to get protection from instants, and we play spells in this deck like that you'll be seeing soon that protect your Hex Drinker early on when it's in those lower level stages, and it's pretty much susceptible to all kinds of removal. And once you're at level 3, now you have a 4/4 protection from instants. So all of a sudden, instants will no longer affect your Hex Drinker. It's not going to get removed. It's not going to get exiled. Nothing's going to happen to it. There's no going to be damage-based effects. The only way your opponent's going to get rid of it is if they have a creature if they have the spell that says target opponent sacrifices a creature or destroy all creatures. Well, then your Hex Drinker will die. Obviously, that's how protection works. Your main goal, of course, and it's happened to me many times, and it's glorious, is to get your Hex Drinker to level 8. Once it's at level 8, it's a 6/6 and has protection from everything, which essentially means it's a true name Nemesis in green for a bunch of mana, to be fair, but it is a true name Nemesis in green, and your opponent is gonna, that's it. I mean, if your opponent wants to attack in, all of a sudden they have to second guess themselves, because your Hex Drinker is going to consume whatever big creature they throw at you. Nothing's going to happen to it, and that creature will probably die. When you attack in with Hex Drinker, your opponent can't do anything. They can't block it. They can't do anything with it. It's their worst nightmare for almost every deck. Every non-combo deck is going to be their worst nightmare. So Hex Drinker is actually just an interesting card to play. The main downside is that, you have to pour in a lot of mana over several turns to get it to the upper levels, and oftentimes if your opponent has removal, they're going to wait for you to burn your first 2 mana to get it to level 2, and then once you want to level it to level 3, then they remove it, right? So those are things you're going to have to play around. Like I said, you have permission to try and stop that, but I think Hex Drinker is an interesting card to play. I definitely don't think you could play it with Hooting Mandrills, but I think Hex Drinker definitely has its place. I don't think it's better, but I do think it's equivalent in certain metas. I do think it's equivalent in certain play styles. I enjoy playing with Hex Drinker, even though it has those susceptibilities. So yeah, it's even as a 4/4, it's crazy. As a 6/6, it's unstoppable, essentially, apart from a board wipe. And yeah, I think Hexdrinker is a really great alternative, or an alternative to this archetype. So moving on to the rest of the creatures. So here we're not playing any Storming Entities, nothing else. All we're playing is 2 Snapcaster Mages. So this is something I was going back and forth on. At first, I had no other creatures. It was just the Delver of Secrets, Tarmogoyf, Hexdrinker. And then I felt like I needed something more to kind of round out the deck. I felt like something was lacking. There was a lack of reach. And Snapcaster Mage kind of closes that gap. It helps me, bolt my opponent an extra time. Helps me bring back a counterspell if I need it. I mean, we all know what Snapcaster Mage does, and we know why it's so expensive, just because it's a very powerful card that they probably won't print again, at least not in a standard format. So Snapcaster Mage really helps bring the deck together. You only really need 2. I don't think I need more than that. I think that would be a bit too much for a Temur deck, at least in Modern. But a 2 of is pretty good, and it's going to help you, like I said, it's going to give you that extra reach to kind of finish off your opponent. Because sometimes your Hexdrinker just dies, or you don't have enough mana to get it to a high enough level, but Snapcaster Mage will kind of help you out there and kind of finish off your opponent. So I think Snapcaster has a place in this deck. So moving on to the Permission, very familiar to the deck tech that you saw last week, except we are also playing Disrupting Shoal. So let me get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. So first off, Stubborn Denial. Still a relevant card, even if you're not playing Hooting Mandrills, because oftentimes you will get Hexdrinker to level 3, at which point it's a 4/4, and then Stubborn Denial is active, so you're not really worried about that. So your Tarmogoyf and your Hexdrinker will almost always satisfy Stubborn Denial's Ferocious ability, and that's the ability you want, right? You want a 1-mana counter non-target creature spell, and yeah, I mean, I still would not play this deck without Stubborn Denial, that's for certain. Mana Leak, it's a 2 of. Again, it's your go-to spell for creature spells that you want to counter, or really anything that you can counter early on in the game, or late game if you're not playing big mana decks. So I think a 2 of at least, and you can play around with these numbers, of course. If you think 4 of Force of Negation and 4 of Disrupting Shoal is too much, you can cut those numbers down a bit to add to Mana Leak, but I'm crazy about free counter spells, which is why you're going to see the next 2 spells here being 4-ofs. So a 4 of Force of Negation, yes, I know I'm nuts, but again, I just love being able to tap out and being confident that I'll be able to counter whatever my opponent's going to play anyway, or almost anything my opponent's going to play, and Force of Negation allows me to do that. I explained it in my previous deck tech. Yes, it does give you some card disadvantage because you are exiling a blue card from your hand, but that's okay because you're not casting this to counter a Serum Visions. You're not casting this to counter an Opt or a Shock, most likely. I mean, you're not doing that. You're using Force of Negation to counter a Karn or a Ugin or a Path to Exile. When you need to protect your creature, you're really targeting non-creature spells that you really do not want. So the card disadvantage may be, or is often going to be to your benefit at the end of the day, because you're stopping them from doing something. You know how many times I've countered a turn 0 or Aether Vial, so before I've even had a chance to play. My opponent goes first, they play Aether Vial, and I force them negation it. That's a very powerful play, because if they're playing Aether Vial turn 1, they probably kept a hand with maybe 1 land, and that happens often. So it kind of screws their entire game plan, and that gives you a big edge. So exiling 1 blue card, it's nothing. Disrupting Shoal. So Disrupting Shoal was almost always present in Temur Delver before Force of Negation was around. And Disrupting Shoal is a bit different. Disrupting Shoal targets any spell, not non-creature, which is a big distinction between Force of Negation and Disrupting Shoal. The main downside of Disrupting Shoal is its exile ability is a bit different from Force of Negation, right? So its exile ability is you got an exile a blue card from your hand with a converted mana cost X, and the spell you're countering has to have that same converted mana cost. Not less than or equal to, not equal to or greater than. It's exactly that mana cost. So if you want to counter a Stoneforge Mystic, you need to exile a Mana Leak, for example, right? You can't exile Stubborn Denial, and you can't exile Force of Negation. That's how Disrupting Shoal works. So it has a wider range of spells it could target. By that I mean it could also target creatures, but it's also a bit more limited in terms of the spells it can target, because there's only so many different types of CMCs you're going to be playing in this deck. So that's, again, something you need to keep in mind. That's why I have selected certain blue cards to be in certain numbers, because you want to have as many, for example, 1 CMC blue cards in your deck, because Modern is full of 1 CMC spells you don't want to deal with. Fatal Push, Path to Exile, Lightning Bolt in certain situations, you know, Death's Shadow, Noble Hierarch, or Arbor Elf, or whatever. You know, 1 mana dorks. You know, there's plenty of 1 mana spells that I'm blanking on right now that you would want to counter with Disrupting Shoal. So again, I think it's pretty powerful, and you can counter plenty of 2 mana spells, 2 CMC spells as well. You know, using Mana Leak and Snapcaster Mage. So yeah, you have a variety of targets, and again, it's going to help you protect your Hex Drinker long enough to get it to at least protection from instants, and then after that you don't really care, because, you know, then it's going to be a lot harder for your opponent to remove Hex Drinker anyway. So that's really why I'm playing 4 Force Negation, 4 Disrupting Shoal. It's kind of all in on pitching, but if you like pitching spells to spells, this deck is going to be fun, because that's what you're doing half the time. So let's get on to the removal. Removal, pretty much what's in the Temur Traverse Delver deck. 4 Lightning Bolt, I'm not going to explain why, and you have 2 Tarfire. The main reason why you're playing Tarfire here is it's a tribal instant. So it counts for 2 card types in your graveyard. That makes your Tarmogoyf a big boy really quickly. So, you know, turn 1, fetch Tarfire, your opponent's Arbor Elf. Turn 2, fetch whatever, play your Tarmogoyf. Your Tarmogoyf's a 4/5, because you have land, instant, tribal, and creature in the graveyard, because you most likely Tarfired your opponent's creature. So you have a 4/5 Tarmogoyf turn 2. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Usually it's a 3/4. Sometimes it's a 2/3. In bad situations, it's a 1/2. But a 4/5 Tarmogoyf turn 2 is pretty awesome. And if you have Disrupting Shoal or Force of Negation to back it up, yeah, that's going to be an issue for your opponent. So, main reason why I'm playing 2 of Tarfire here. The Cantrips, again, Serum Visions is going to be your best cantrip overall in Modern, so you're going to be playing 4 of. Don't really need to explain to you why. It's kind of like Lightning Bolt, it's just a given. Sleight of Hand. So a lot of you are going to be like, hey, you should really be playing Mishra's Bauble because it's going to make your Tarmogoyf bigger. I agree with you. But remember what I said, you're playing a pitch-heavy deck, a pitch spell-heavy deck. So Disrupting Shoal, Force of Negation, they demand blue cards. Disrupting Shoal demands a specific CMC of blue card. So Sleight of Hand is really here to shore up my 1 mana or my 1 CMC blue spells so that I can have viable targets for Disrupting Shoal. So I mean, I don't want to pitch Delver of Secrets to Disrupting Shoal, ideally. I want to play Delver of Secrets. I'd much rather pitch Sleight of Hand or even Serum Visions to Disrupting Shoal. So again, that's really the reasoning of why I'm not playing Mishra's Bauble here. I'm playing Sleight of Hand instead. And Sleight of Hand is a perfectly good cantrip spell. It's kind of a cantrip spell, I guess. It's perfectly good, trust me. I mean, looking at the top 2 cards and picking one is great. You're digging through 2 cards, the other card is not going away, it's going to the bottom of your library. It saved me a million times over. So Sleight of Hand is good just on itself, and it's a very good target for Disrupting Shoal or even Force of Negation. It's really the main reason I'm playing it. You don't need Thought Scour in this deck because you're not playing Hooting Mandrill, so there's no reason for you to rush a lot of cards into your graveyard. And again, you are an interactive deck, so as long as you're not playing a deck that's just, you know, playing solitaire with itself and just being boring, the graveyard is going to fill pretty quickly. And actually, even those decks, you're going to be countering a lot of their spells, so the graveyards are going to be filling pretty quickly. Your Tarmogoyf is going to be getting big, so you don't have to worry about that too much. So the lands, I don't think anything has changed for the lands. I think I've pretty much kept it all the same. Yeah, I mean, there's not much you want to change here. It's essentially the same deck. You've replaced Swing Mandrills with Hex Drinker. Traverse has been replaced with Sleight of Hand, but you know, there's not much else that's going on. So this mana base, again, like I said in my previous deck tech, it's bulletproof. It's lasted me 5 years plus in terms of being a good mana base. That's also Blood Moon proof, and yeah, I wouldn't change these in any number. If budget isn't a concern, then this is what you want to be playing. Botanical Sanctum, Spirebluff Canal, those are all options. Plenty of Temur Delver players play those cards. I personally, as a player, when I play a land, I want it to do what it's supposed to do right away. I want that option. If it means I have to pay life, I don't care. I want that option right now. I don't want that option next turn. And unfortunately with Spirebluff Canal and Botanical Sanctum, oftentimes you're going to be drawing it as your 4th land, and you're going to be playing it, and you don't have that 4th land right away because it's coming to play tapped. That bothers me to no end. That is why I often don't like fancy lands with, like Mystic Sanctuary. I believe is the card. I'm not a fan of it, even though it's powerful. I'm not a fan of the requirement because oftentimes it's coming in tapped, at least in a lot of Temur decks I'm playing. So I have an aversion to those type of lands, which is why you don't see them here. That's my bias, at least you know. Sideboard. So I hope you've watched my 40+ minute Temur sideboard tech video that I posted I think it was last week. You know, a lot more people watched it all the way through than I thought they would, which is great because I spent a lot of time on that video. I recommend you give it a watch if you want an in-depth tech on sideboard card options when you're playing Temur in Modern. Very specific. This week, on Friday, I'm releasing another video that's Simic deck tech. So it's going to be very similar to the Temur one, but it's with a Simic deck in mind in Modern. Anyway, it's off topic. This is a sideboard that I played most often with this deck. It's more or less the configuration I ended on when I was, when I finished all my matches, all my grinding. So one of Engineered Explosives, I'm really torn right now internally as to what sweeper card I want in my Temur decks. Engineered Explosives just seems to be the main go-to for me right now. It's just kind of like a catch-all for spells, for permanents that are 3 CMC or less. So that's why I always have Engineered Explosives somewhere. But I'm really torn, and that's going to be definitely a personal decision and a meta call for sure. Surgical Extraction, again, it's great. You're targeting a very specific card in your opponent's graveyard, and you're getting rid of it everywhere. It's going to be good for Uro. It's going to be good against Dredge. It's going to be good against any deck, really, where you're worried about their graveyard. So, Surgical Extraction as a one-of. And then Gravedigger's Cage as well. Again, these are numbers you can play with depending on what you prefer. Gravedigger's Cage is more of a permanent killer for, those aforementioned cards and decks. So Dredge, Uro, anything that has graveyard recursion, that's all going to be shut off by Gravedigger's Cage. And also libraries as well. So Collective Company will be shut down, stuff like that. Blood Moon. So, Blood Moon. Do I really need to explain to you this? I think I've gone through Blood Moon a trillion times. I love Blood Moon. If I'm playing Temur, I'm almost certainly playing Blood Moon, unless I'm playing some special version of a Temur deck that's playing like a very greedy mana base, and then Blood Moon is maybe not really logical. But yeah, like I told you, the mana base in this deck is Blood Moon proof. You have most of the fetches that you require to get the lands, or the basics, I should say, that you need to Blood Moon on turn 3. Worst case turn 4. So yeah, play Blood Moon. It's going to shut off all of the problem decks that you don't want to have to deal with. Big mana decks, decks that go super greedy on their mana bases, which are often combo decks. Blood Moon is going to cause havoc for all of them. And of course it turns off the land decks that are floating around there. Huntmaster of the Fells. I mean, listen, I love Huntmaster of the Fells, so I don't care how much you tell me it's not relevant anymore. I'm going to jam him into a Temur Delver deck. Huntmaster of the Fells still ends games for me. I have the proof is in the pudding. I've posted up decks. I posted up matches last week. I'll be posting up more today for Temur Hex Delver. And sometimes Huntmaster comes onto the battlefield, my opponent concedes because they have nothing. If you can't remove Huntmaster of the Fells, and you know enough about Huntmaster of the Fells, you know that I'm going to manipulate my turns to ensure that he flips when I want him to flip. And that's going to cause problems for you, and and by you I mean my opponent. And my opponent is going to have to sculpt their turns to also ensure that he does not flip. So it's a big pain in the ass for your opponents. Huntmaster of the Fells, if he flips, and I always say this, if he flips just once, he's already paid for himself. Because he gained you 2 life, he gave you a 2/2 body, he pinged your opponent he shocked your opponent for 2, and he shocked one of your opponent's creatures, and they probably died. for 4 mana, right? So I think Huntmaster of Hells is an awesome card in a deck like this. It's great for the grindy matches. I even bring him in against the burn decks if there is space for him. Because again, there's the life gain and it's giving you an extra body. Yeah, your opponent's probably going to have something to kill him with if you don't have permission to stop it. But it's fine. I mean, if a bolt going to Huntmaster of Hells and not to my face is a bolt I don't have to worry about. So again, I think Huntmaster of Hells is a great card to have in your 75. A braid's a braid. You can bring it in against creature heavy decks. You can bring it against artifact decks. You can bring it against both. It's an awesome versatile card. Veil of Summer, still legal, so play it. Reality Shift is a card I've seen others playing. I don't know who it was specifically. I want to give them credit, but this was not my find. But Reality Shift is an interesting card back, a few years, and a lot of people, I think, just overlooked it. And yeah, Reality Shift's actually pretty good when you don't have access to good black and white removal. Exile target creature, its control manifests the top card of your library. Who cares? You got rid of, I don't know, Reality Smasher. You got rid of any creature that you can't kill with a lightning bolt. So I think Reality Shift is actually a pretty cool card for 2 mana. I'm trying it out more. I think you should give it a shot. Last but not least, Shadow Spear. It's amazing. Again, you swing in once with a Tarmogoyf with this, or just add insult to injury, a Hex Drinker. It's hilarious. I put it in there just because I want those plays. But you also bring it in against burn decks, aggro decks, decks where you're going to be clashing a lot with your opponent on the ground. Shadow Spear is actually pretty great. Or you attach it to Delver of Secrets and attack in the air, which is also hilarious. It's hilarious all around. Last up, the matchups. So the matchups don't really change too much with Hex Drinker being in and Hooting Mandrills being out. Your combo play is probably not going to change too much, if anything, because you're playing a lot more pitch spells. Your play against combo decks probably increases. It improves. So I would say the Temur Hex Drinker Delver variant does a bit better against combo, but that's mostly because of the more Disrupting Shoal and Force of Negation, not necessarily because of Hex Drinker. Although Hex Drinker, if you do get to level it up to level 6 pretty quick, level 8 pretty quick to become a 6/6. It's gonna be a big problem for your combo player. But again, combo usually doesn't care about your creatures. Aggro, so aggro is gonna be interesting because again, you can get to a 4/4 Hex Drinker relatively quickly. Your Tarmogoyfs are still big, and your Delver of Secrets are still there. Snapcaster Mage is going to be there to help recur, your Lightning Bolts, your Tar Fires to help kill more creatures, which is great. Your Hex Drinker as a 4/4 is going to stop a lot of the small creatures, smashing into you. In fact, oftentimes, it's happened to me where I have like a Hex Drinker and a Tarmogoyf, or Hex Drinker and a Delver of Secrets, and my opponent has like 6 creatures on the battlefield, but they can't attack in, profitably, because they know I'm going to block their big creature, and they need to attack with their, or not their big creature, but their important creature. They know I'm going to block it with Hex Drinker. So, it just stops the game, which is what you want. You want time to kind of recoup. And, and especially once you get Hex Drinker to level 8 and it becomes a 6/6 potential from everything, it's going to be a joke. So, although, again, against aggro, it's going to be hard to get to 8. You can do it, though. You have the tools at your disposal. You have plenty of removal, plenty of counters. And you have plenty of ways to stall out your opponent. So aggro, I think, is actually still a pretty good matchup. Big mana decks, not much changes here. Big mana is always going to be a problem for you. Again, you are playing more counters with Disrupting Shoal, but Disrupting Shoal is not going to target too much in big mana decks. It's going to target Ancient Grudge. It's going to target Expedition Map, which is great. Force of Negation also targets them, though, right? You have an extra set, though. That's what I'm trying to say. But overall, your matchup odds is not going to be that much better against big mana decks. They're still crappy to play against. Game 1, it's going to be 50-50 luck if you get the nuts and they don't. Game 2, it's pretty much similar. Your tools are going to come in. If you don't draw into your tools, your odds are going to be no better than 50-50. That's it. It's never going to be above that. And you'll be lucky if you get 50-50. Unfortunately, that's just the case. You can win, but you have to really know the matchup, and you have to really know your deck. Not Magic. Nothing much changes here either. They're just doing what they want to do. They're playing around with their graveyard and having fun with themselves. So unfortunately, Not much changes with the Hex Drinker variant. Yes, again, you can counter more spells, but it's not really what they're doing anyway when they're diddling around with their graveyard. So, yeah, not much has changed here in terms of your viability against not magic. If there's a lot of it in your meta, bring in more graveyard hate, because the graveyard hate that we do have access to is pretty much detrimental. So Gravedigger's Cage shuts them down. Surgical Extraction shuts them down in a different way, and it's actually a bit more brutal. Because Gravedigger's Cage they can remove, Surgical Extraction they can't really do anything against. So if you target Prize Amalgam, or you target that stupid Minotaur or whatever it is, I forget its name, or Conflagrate or whatever, I mean, you're targeting it and you're removing it from everywhere, and it's going to be pretty brutal for your opponent. So, it's going to be up to you how you want to, how much you want to side against, or how much you want to prepare for not magic. Control matchups. So Control is going to have issues with your Hex Drinker. If it can't get rid of your Hex Drinker, it's going to have problems with it. So Archmage's Charm is a thing that Control plays, and it will steal your Hex Drinker and you'll feel like shit. But you do have Disrupting Shoal and Force of Negation, so it shouldn't be a problem. That being said, once it gets to 4, once it gets to level 3 and has Protection from Instants, your Control opponent is going to start sweating. And if they can't get rid of it by level 8, oh boy. Big issue, because again, they can't do anything. None of their little creatures, their whatever creatures they're playing, is not going to do anything. Even if they're playing Stormforge Mystic and Batterskulls on the battlefield, it's not going to do anything. So it's going to be a big issue for your opponent. I find you actually don't have that in the non-Hex Drinker variants. In the Hex Drinker variants, if you can get your Hex Drinker to level 8, it's going to be a big problem for your opponent. So overall, do I think your matchup against Control is any better in this variant? Maybe. Partially because of Hex Drinker, and partially because you are also still playing more permission spells, right? Whether that's gonna affect your overall matchup against Control, I'm not sure. I still think it's a 50-50 split, but it's better than big mana. And when you bring in your sideboard, you bring in your Veil of Summers and your Abrades to get rid of whatever whatever Stoneforge is bringing in, your odds actually increase. So I think Control is pretty much the same. You have some benefits though with Hex Drinker in your roster. Finally, mid-range. Again, not much changes here. I think overall mid-range matchups are pretty good. But that being said, oftentimes when we're talking mid-range in Modern, we're talking black. There's black somewhere in that mid-range deck, and black is really what's the killer here. They have access to Fatal Push, they have access to Thoughtseize, they have access to Inquisition of Kozilek, they have access to Liliana of the Veil, they have access to all of these black cards that are really going to give you a headache. Again, the benefit of Hex Drinker, or the Hex Drinker variant, is that you're playing Disrupting Shoal, so you're going to have more answers to those spells early on or at any point, without having mana or open mana, which is a good thing. But again, Disrupting Shoal against Thoughtseize, who's winning here? I think your opponent's winning. So you're almost never going to be countering a Thoughtseize or Inquisition of Kozilek unless you're protecting a third card that you absolutely must have. Veil of Summer is really going to come in handy here if you're playing a lot of these decks in your meta, or if you're expecting to play a lot of them in a league or whatever, bring in more Veil of Summers. But overall, keep in mind that these decks also play very greedy mana bases, so Blood Moon is going to be your friend. So again, I think your overall matchup against mid-range decks is pretty good, unless they have the nuts, in which case you're always going to lose. That's how it is. And that's it for Temur Hex Delver. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I'm going to be posting up 3 matches, as I promised, every week. Deck Tech, 3 matches. So those 3 matches are going to be rolling out over the next several hours, so stay tuned for those. Let me know what you think about Hex Drinker in a Temur Delver shell. I had fun with it. I don't know if I prefer it over my traditional Hooting Mandrels, Delver Seeker's Tarmogoyf and Storming Entity, but I wouldn't, I'm definitely going to come back to this deck at some point, because I did have fun playing with it, and a 6/6 Hex Drinker is just hilarious, let's just be honest. So, let me know what you think. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, follow me on Twitter. All that stuff really helps me out a lot. You have no idea. I really appreciate your comments and your feedback as well. A big thank you to my patrons for being there early on and for the support. If you're interested in becoming a patron, check out the link in the description. I'm thinking of adding more and more features and benefits to patrons all the time and having discussions with them. So yeah, if you're interested in being a patron, check out the link in the description. Have a good one.